and others. So you're getting this information, but largely it's being kept from you. Now, if you knew the story when you wouldn't be hanging out, if you knew the story ahead of time, and maybe your neighbors probably wouldn't be hanging a Ukrainian flag on, their St. Louis doorstep. And if you knew this story, you certainly wouldn't be using your tax dollars to fund military industrial complex equipment. That's why they lie to you, right? It's part of this propaganda so that they can continue to fund this proxy war. So now that certain areas have been liberated of Nazis, the Russian army has been setting up humanitarian centers to deliver and hand out food and water, protein specifically, water, and even chocolate to the kids. Now, this is a journalist. Her name is Ava Bartlett. She is Canadian. She's a journalist who's covered Syria. She's in eastern Ukraine, covering the removal of the Azov Nazi battalion. But before the humanitarian aid arrived, as a bloody war in this region. So to listen to the Russian government mission was a denazification of Ukraine. Well, it seems exactly that's what's been unfolding, much to the chagrin of the Western media. They would love for you to believe that Russians are attacking all sorts of civilian targets on purpose. But thanks to these brave journalists on the ground, that's not true. In fact, it's the opposite. So here is Ava Bartlett. She's a journalist in this region covering some of the humanitarian areas that have popped up. Watch this.
Yes, in several parts of the areas that were controlled by the Ukrainian Nazi battalions, the Russian army is now distributing humanitarian assistance. This particular town was hit by these battalions and destroyed a factory, destroyed school, and there is a severe crisis going on here. And to talk about this, I have a guest. She's an American-Canadian journalist living in Russia, Ava Bartlett. Ava, what's the humanitarian situation in the newly liberated areas of the Donbass?
Well, I think as people will see behind us, people are lining up for the supplies, which are actually quite sufficient, it seems, and they're coming in batches to collect supplies. I would note that this is similar to what we saw in Syria once areas were liberated of terrorists that had occupied these areas and starved the civilians. Once the areas were liberated, humanitarian corridors, well, before they were liberated, humanitarian corridors were set up, civilians fled to secure areas, and then they were given humanitarian aid.
And is this issue really covered by the mainstream media in the West?
Absolutely not, and it might seem strange, but I've been taking photos of the actual aid packages, what goes into the boxes or the bags, because I know the predictable Western response will be, well, they're empty or something like that. But they contain a variety of proteins, vegetable in tins, chocolate even, water obviously, and it's not going to be reported on in Western media, or they will say this is just a stage, that these are just actors, or this is just happening in one region. But we've seen a few regions already, and we've only been here for a couple of days.
Interesting, right?
Wow.
Stories you will not. How many of you right now hit that like button if you would like to see more of this type of news coverage?
Yeah.
Because
if you go to her
that.
Twitter profile at Ava K. Bartlett, her Twitter profile byline is, I go to the places I write about. So this is actual, like, she's trying to let you know what's actually happening because she is telling you what we are not allowed to see.
Unlike the New York Times, which should say, we don't go to the places we write about.
Right. We do a strong Google search.
Yeah. We report from afar. So to listen to Russian government missions, when they said at the outset, why were they going into Ukraine? Why was Russia going into Ukraine? Why did Putin say this? Why did their foreign office say this? Why did their Ministry of Defense say this? All of it, every member of the Russian Federation said this was the denazification of Ukraine. Well, the Western media laughed at that. Like, there's no Nazis there, even though we've covered them for years and now we're hiding it. Well, that seems to be exactly what's been unfolding. Again, much to the chagrin of Western media. They would love you to believe that Russians are attacking all sorts of civilian targets on purpose. Thanks to brave journalists, though, on the ground, that's not true. In fact, the opposite is true. Let's look more deeply now at the Battle of Mariupol. Listen to the people of Mariupol describe who did this to their city and who kept them hidden in basements. Listen.
Well, the first feeling here is not a thought. It's just an emotion. It's an anguish so far that it still makes me cry. And I have come here on purpose. I'm not a government man. I'm a producer, a poet, a sculptor, a designer. Let's talk about Russia. This is the territory of Russia. Russians in this territory don't want to live as the United States dictates. That's the whole conflict. All the propaganda is American. All this was done by the Azov regime, shooting people on purpose, setting people on fire on purpose.
I just want to say in our chat, Deadless Guns says, I just want to point out that there are more people watching this show right now live than are on ABC News.
Oh.
I get chills thinking about that. There's so many people here who want the truth about these stories, and we're going to continue to bring it to you. That man we just saw was a poet. He's a sculptor. He's in that region, and he says the Nazis were responsible for what happened here. This man that we're going to see describes his time during the last few months when these Ukrainian Nazi soldiers broke into his house, beat him in the face with the butt of their gun, and he still has headaches to this day. They smashed in his face, stole his food. These are the Nazis that broke into his house, he says. Listen to this man.
We were in the house when the Ukrainian soldiers arrived, and they started beating me, provoking me right away. And they took things, they took cigarettes, they took food. They beat me on the floor. I still have a headache. Why all this? I don't know.
I don't know. Alejandro Kirk is an amazing journalist. He's a journalist for Telesir TV, one of the few news organizations covering this story. He's been in Mariupol now 4 different times at length, and he explains that, and what's interesting about going there 4 times is that he's seen a progression of the people in Mariupol and in other cities in eastern Ukraine. And he explains that the people there fear these Nazi spies, that if they speak on camera, they will be killed. So when he was interviewing these individuals that were trapped in the basements, that were being held against their will, they would basically wait until the cameras were turned off before telling them the truth of the Ukrainian Nazi occupation. Listen to what they say now about why, and he explains how they fear these Nazi spies because their friends have gone missing.
The People's Republic of Donetsk. These people are have been the subject of many suffering in the last 3 weeks. Fierce combats have been taking place in this town. Many buildings are destroyed or burned by the combat. They were used as a human shield by the Ukrainian forces and also by the Nazi battalions that were operating here. For the last 8 years, these people did not have the right to their own language. For 8 years, these people under Ukrainian rule were second-class citizens for being ethnic Russians. And now they are afraid. And why they are afraid? Because it is suspected that many Ukrainian spies, many Ukrainian infiltrators are among them, again, threatening their lives. And that's why when we speak to them, they say one thing on camera and they say a whole different story out of camera.
Yeah. And when they do speak, they tell amazing stories of these Nazis using women and children as human shields because they are cowards.
Angel Baby Cards in the chat makes a good point. How do we know the translations are appropriate? Because we don't speak Russian. And so we are relying on these news organizations to translate it appropriately. But also, if any of you speak Ukrainian or Russian, please bring in.
Yeah, and I've actually heard from quite a few of you on this, and with even more structure on some of the quotes that we play here. I don't speak Russian. I don't speak Ukrainian. I'm relying on a Latin American who speaks Russian, who is in this region, an American, Canadian journalists, other journalists who are like Patrick Lancaster and others who are brave and who are in this region, who do speak the language and do the translations. And then, of course, you can actually use, and I use this, you can actually use different translation tools, which I use on my computer, on my Mac. They're very, very powerful translation tools. They're not perfect, but you will want to rely on these journalists to get accurate representation of that. But when you see a man's face beaten in, kind of tells the tale, right? That's also there's things you can get without words too.
Yes, clearly.
Right? And so these people are telling amazing stories, right? Using women and children as human shields. That's what they're doing because they are cowards. Now, Maxim Gargov is a reporter who specializes in covering crimes against humanity. Imagine that's your job as a reporter. Like, he goes to regions of the world and uncovers these things that are hidden. He covers crimes against humanity. And he says what the Nazis in Ukraine are doing is textbook. Listen to Maxim Gargov here in the eastern part of Ukraine.
They shoot people. They occupy buildings, civilian buildings. They occupy schools, hospitals. They use them as a place for artillery, for tanks. This is a special technique. They hiding near the civil building. They shoot from there and then goes somewhere else. Or, for example, they occupy the floor or apartments and organize the place to fire.
What cowards!
They just
They
organize
fire and they
position
run.
there.
Little cowards.
And the people was from the
weasels.
left, from right, or upstairs or downstairs.
Yeah. So they fire and then they run. They're little weasels, aren't they? Right? Like, they're there and then they know that they're going to be fired back upon, right? They know that they're going to be attacked because they're they're using these schools, they are using these places on purpose as human shields. It's absolutely disgusting. And you can actually listen to Alejandro Kirk explaining in more detail, another journalist, how these Nazi Ukrainian soldiers are using civilians as human shields. Listen to this.
On the following visits, the last one was last week, there is more self-confidence and people speak more about what happened. And the story is always the same, not only in Mariupol, it's also the same in Valnavacha, in Stila, in Lugansk, even in the neighborhoods here, right here in Donetsk, that the bombing, well, it's different here in Donetsk, but in those areas where the Azov battalion were, they would occupy one floor of the residential building. Then they would put the people on the other floor or on the next in the next apartment and establish fire points from there. Mortars, machine guns, but also in the courtyards they would install tanks, artillery, or mortars, so that they were using effectively them as human shields. And everybody says that. I mean, I found nobody who would say, no, they left us alone, they allowed us to go, they did not want to put us on the fire line. I never found anyone saying that. And the more and more you dig into it, the more the truth is coming out that these people were actually doing that which is forbidden by the Geneva Convention.
So what weaponry, again, are they using? Well, we reported it at the top of the show. It's the United States that seems hell-bent on arming whoever is on the side of Ukraine and anti-Russia.
Yeah, and we've covered, someone said in the chat yesterday and asked this question, they said, you mean to tell me that the United States has armed these individuals? And I'm not telling you this. The facts are, the gray zone has already reported this, that yes, in fact, they have United States weapons in their hands. That's indisputable. And
yes.
that has been proven by journalists who've been covering that region. So yes, whether or not they're handed to them, like, here you go, it doesn't matter. We're sending those weapons. And as CNN has uncovered, we don't even know where these weapons go. They go into a black hole. And guess what? Guess where they turn up? They turn up in the hands of these guys.
Which the Biden administration has deemed an acceptable risk. Mm-hmm. We know that's going to happen. We're sending them anyway. A government official told that to CNN.
Well, we're learning more about the horrific occupation of this region by the Nazis and how they treated the ethnic Russians in this area over the past 8 years. Of course, we've been reporting on this show how a genocide has been unfolding for the last 8 years, ever since the Maidan coup, and ever since the United States installed a puppet government in Ukraine. The eastern region of Ukraine has been under constant attack, and the people have been treated as second-class citizens, as you just heard from Alejandro Kirk's reporting. We've been reporting that, though, for weeks, so this is nothing new, right? They've been beaten, they've been harassed, they've been arrested and killed. And most of the ethnic Russians in this region, by the way, speak Russian. They would rather learn Russian in school and, Ukrainian on the side, right? That's what they would do in school. But when the Nazis took over, they were forbidden from speaking Russian, and it was outlawed at their schools.
Well, actually, it was the Zelensky regime that when the election was overturned in 2000, or the military coup happened in 2014, and the new government was installed, it actually was supposedly the democratic, upstanding regime that outlawed a language that was used in a major part of the country.
Right.